Welcome to the Backyard Professor Live. I am grateful to be here tonight. I am very excited for tonight. And welcome to all my new subscribers. I know there's been quite a few who have been coming in, and I want to welcome you, make you feel at home. I am not overly formal. I hope to not be too informal. I do pull a few bloopers every show. People will get used to it for sure. Tonight, I want to talk about Chris Bledsoe and his incredible journey in his life and his book, The UFO of God. I've been watching several different video interviews, very different reviews of his book. And I've been reading the comments. Yes, I'm one of those who read the comments of some of the UAP researchers and people. Oh, thank you, Flat Pack. That's very kind of you. Tim Rathbone, welcome. RPBAJB, welcome. Ooh, he says, I'm holding high expectations for this show. Let's put this comment up. I'm holding high expectations for this show. Bledsoe's book is a game changer, in my opinion. No pressure, though, BYP. Gee, thanks. No pressure felt, my friend. No, tonight's going to be a fun night. And I'm grateful I have the opportunity to talk about such an incredible book and such an incredible person. I would like to get something off my chest, not in attempt to be snide or rude, but I am noticing a pattern with a lot of folks who are they don't believe what Chris says. They think he's making it up. They make up information about what he says that is false, and then lambast him for not matching that criteria of their invented information. And I'm finding that many of these kind of folks have not read his book. My personal advice in the future, if you want to remain credible, read the book first. Understand what Bledsoe is saying, and then proceed forward. Come on. That's not that hard to figure out, I don't think. So anyway, yes, I'm not going to review this book in the same manner. I've got several of my markers of pages that I do want to talk about. We've all heard the Chris Bledsoe story. Many of us have read the book. And I'm not going to just go through his story again and bore you. I also have my own biases, which I am well aware of. And Bledsoe has his, and I want to talk about a few of those tonight. The one thing that I really appreciated is Jim Semivan's, the former CIA clandestine directorate of operations, foreword to his book. It was Jim in Bledsoe's story who finally came out and just lambasted the public. He told his family, Bledsoe's family, the kids were traumatized, his son, Chris Jr., and others, and he told them to gather people up in the neighborhood, and this was several years down the road, during further events with the UAPs, and bring as many people as they could, and not very many people showed, but a few significant critics showed, and Semivan read them the Riot Act. And if I can remember right, I'm going to start off with that Riot Act because it is so important how he showed people that the Bledsoes were not just making stuff up. And so, and true to form, I had all this planned out. Oh, that's Diane Pasolka. I'll get to that. That was good too. And that's part of his healing situation. Anyway, I will get to it. I can't find it right now. What I did like in his foreword, Jim's foreword to this book, and they are good friends with Bledsoe. You know, Chris is the type of guy I would love to have as my neighbor. I really would. I would love to have him and the family over for barbecues and go hiking with him and all that jazz. That would be rocking cool. Hi, S. Parker. Good to see you. So in Jim's foreword, he talks about Chris had, and this is on page X, Chris has probably been visited officially now, officially and unofficially, by more government types and UFO researchers than any other contactee or experiencer. And that includes high up in the military, that includes high up in the government, that includes the everyday regular Joes on the street. He is certainly one of the most interviewed of people. I have not had a chance to get hold of him yet. I have made a couple of comments on his Instagram, and he has hearted my comments, so he at least knows that I do like his book. Jim says something very interesting: the science necessary to explain the phenomenon and or place it in a context and the philosophy to understand it ontologically, these are simply not available or exist only in a nascent form from our point of view. It's very important, and I played a video clip from, again, Richard Dolan the other night on the importance of humility in, oh, hold on, my heater's blowing. I don't want that to interfere with my voice. Boy, see, I told you I was going to pull some BYP bloopers. I should have done that ahead of time, right? No, the idea is we are being interacted with an anomaly, pretty weird one at that. And so we've got to recognize our own limitations. You know, we love to pretend like we're the apex big dog on the planet, and might be coming out that we're really not. And so our technology and capability may not be what it's supposed to be up to at this point. We're still at the beginning. We'll see. But, and this is Semivan's really important point here, not having a context or a branch of science to specifically place the phenomenon is certainly not an excuse to ignore it. I can't argue with that. That makes perfect sense. The interesting thing he says, too, on the very first page, if there is a generally accepted truism in the study of UFOs and the phenomena, it is that the whole subject is extraordinarily complex and perhaps ultimately insoluble. This situation may change, of course, but I think not without the help of the phenomenon itself. We will find through the course of my review tonight that he's had help as well, Chris himself. Now, the other important point that Semivan makes in the foreword, yes, I am one of those who love to read the forewords. I also read indexes if I can. Chris doesn't have an index in this, kind of disappointing, but it's all good because I'm one of those that I make my own index to the books anyway. I do that with all books, even the published books from college universities, Yale, Harvard, Oxford, etc., because no index is ever adequate in my opinion. But Semivan says this: eventually, if we begin to pay more attention, we may finally get to a place where we know where to start asking the right questions. And who was it? Bertrand Russell? I can't remember the philosopher who said, and I know Isaac Asimov repeated this. In fact, I'm gonna pull a BYP blooper on you. I know the exact book. I've got this understood so much. This is important. Isaac Asimov's book of Science and Nature Quotations. I've got it marked exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, Walter won't be able to find it. Yes, here we go. Page XVI in Asimov. His criteria for a quotation, and he takes quotations from absolutely everybody, and every subject: science and education, ornithology, nuclear energy, mineralogy, matter, genetics, error, energy, dietetics, botany, the atom, astronomy, anthropology, animal behavior, agriculture, etc. And he alphabetized them, which is nice. Asimov was nothing if not thorough, right? But here's what is so interesting that I really loved about this book itself was his attitude is the quotation expressing a lasting truth. Is it doing that? Or do time and change make it obsolete? If it is true, what is the basic truth it encapsulates? And of what use is it to science as a whole? You may surprise yourself with the byways of thought into which the quote might lead you and the subtle pleasures you will derive from it, because you read just a bunch of stupid quotes and you go, yeah, well, big deal, who cares? And XX. I thought I had it. XX. I know I've got it. I've written this down. Boy, I'll tell you what. Here it is. Page XX. This is the one I'm looking for. The mere formulation of a problem is often far more essential than its solution. And this is from Einstein, which may be merely a matter of mathematical or experimental skill to raise new questions, to raise new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and marks real advances in science. That's beautifully said. I love how he says that. So that's enough of Asimov. I did not intend to do that tonight, but I did do it, so you had to suffer through it, for which I apologize incessantly. So here is the best part of Semivan's foreword. I'm not a researcher, he says, but like many of you who have purchased this wonderful book, I am a devoted student of the phenomenon. And while there are many students of the phenomenon who claim to have an understanding of all the variables and the subsets of the subject, no one, to my knowledge, has come up with an adequate theory or hypothesis to explain all of the weirdness, the absurdities, and high strangeness associated with UAPs. Chris has his own ideas about the phenomena and expressed it as expressed in this wonderful retelling of his story, and I share many of them. Here is the point that I'm going to focus on tonight. This is critically fascinating to me personally. To me, though, one of the most compelling aspects of Chris's story is his depiction of the lady, a truly enigmatic figure with the obvious religious and cultural correspondences. She has appeared before, often in quasi-religious contexts, and her role is always as a protector, a guide, and a hierophant of the other world. That's what I want to focus on tonight. I'm going to unabashedly say, yes, that is my bias. I have studied the ancient mother goddess figure, if you want, for lack of a better description, the divine feminine. You wouldn't think that had anything to do with UAPs until Chris Bledsoe came along. And to me, this was a very powerful authenticating factor. And her actions, her interactions, her reactions to Chris and to his family and to the world at large. This is a very fascinating aspect which has changed my understanding, not only of organized religion, but of philosophy, of sociology, of history, without question, of science, interestingly enough. And so I can't get into all of that, but that is one of the most important points to this entire book, in my opinion. So let's get on to it. I'm going to skip the front part of all of the introduction, the story, his childhood, etc., his growing up years, and all that jazz. When he had his first UAP encounter, he was with people who worked with him, as well as his son, Chris Jr., and he had an abduction. And he describes that very well in the book. And he came back 20 minutes later, not realizing that he'd been abducted, or at least missing, and he had been gone all night long. So he experienced the famous missing time that so many abductees talk about. And it shocked all of the other guys. They had stayed out all night looking for him and could not find him. And then he comes walking into camp 20 minutes later to the fire. And his son also had an experience with the UAPs, with the beings with the red eyes. And he was 17 at the time, very impressionable, young teenager. And it hit him the hardest. It gave him the worst problems because of all the mockery and the kids in school and his own friends and the neighbors and the church, etc. Hi, Defense by Design. Hey, Debbie Donovan. Hi, Shelley Montgomery. Good to see you. Hey, Uncle Bob. Oh, it could have been, yeah. Uncle Bob asks, is it possible they were drugged? They could have been, yeah, by the UAPs, because there's no question he saw orbs and they chased him around and he kept trying to hide, and then he would sneak through some of the tall stuff. He'd go into a ditch and crawl through the ditch, etc., trying to escape them. And he finally ended up where I might be mixing up the story. This is the later story. Yeah, when they got home and the UAPs came to their house, he said they had run around his pointing dog pointed out toward the forest, and he had run around the house and the dog kennel with his son Chris grabbing him by his shirt, but Chris had let go and ran back into the house, so he was out there all alone. And he said, when I was trying to catch my breath and figure out what to do next, I looked over my shoulder expecting to see Junior behind me. I felt terrible for allowing us to get separated when he was so scared. I turned fully around. Oh my God. Standing 4 feet in front of me was a 3.5 foot tall being, gently glowing the color of the moon. 2 red eyes. A glassy, translucent triangle was fixed on its chest. Again, I shook with terror. I'm sorry. You got me. I'm sorry for running. I surrender. There was nothing else you could do. As I said this, the being was responding, you don't understand. We are not here to hurt you. We are here to help you. Now, he says that happened telepathically. So it's not an evil intent. It's not a demon. I'm going to emphasize that tonight, because these things are not acting like demons. People who keep saying it's a demon either have not read his book, or they're putting their own bias into this, when the book shows that this is not how demons behave. And I will emphasize that as one aspect of my review tonight. I'm going to defend Chris Bledsoe. I do not believe he's possessed of the devil or Satan, regardless of the Baptist church who tricked him into giving a group discussion, and the minister kept trying to make it into demons, and it was embarrassing for everybody. And then the group of little old gray-haired ladies pulled him out of there and aside and listened to him in a much more honest, realistic fashion. So that's enough of that said. For the moment, I'll return to that. Here is the conclusion stated in the front of the book, page 96. Having hunted, killed, and dismantled the relatives of almost every animal and bird around me during my lifetime, I was attuned to their ways. When foxes were mating, where dove nests could be found, how many deer had left tracks through the mud. The shame I felt, now this is interesting, at having killed so many of them indiscriminately was crushing. In 2001 on a hunting trip, I killed a black bear weighing over 660 pounds, making it the record for the largest in the state for that year. Seeing bears, especially moms with young cubs, filled me with sadness, but it also filled me with tenderness. I was constantly reminded of the second night I saw the beings, and here's the point I want to emphasize here. Their message of compassion toward all life was resoundingly compelling. Demons wouldn't have that understanding or approach, I don't think. I've never heard where demons care about the sanctity of life, but on the other hand, the holy beings could be that way. So that's one such comment. Now I'm going to flip over here through more of his story, and this is the core. This is the core of his book. And so forgive me, I'm going to try to read it so that it's very interesting to you. For those of you who haven't read it, I don't think this is a spoiler alert, but I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to read the whole 5 pages to you. They're short. It's big print, small pages. But this is the context of the greatest revelation Chris ever had when the lady showed up to him. And it's certainly not something that he was expecting at all, even maybe. Hey, Mark Crispin, good to see you. Gary Carter, good to see you. Shelley Montgomery, good to see you. Wally Soto, good to see you. Harlan Lang, good to see you. So, on this calm, clear night, the almost hurricane-force gale made me stagger backwards. My eyes had adjusted, having been in the dark for enough time, so it was only detail and not substance that escaped my sight. I looked up to where I thought the gust was coming from, and I saw in the trees that a hole had opened up several feet off the ground. A zone about the size of the car was suddenly a complete blackness, and there was nothing discernible within it. The second I felt the blast of air and saw the void, out of it came charging a 1,500-pound black bull with horns. Growing up next to cows, I knew what this meant. An angry charging bull does not give up, just like in a bullfight, but I was not a matador. My whole inner being screamed with terror as it ran full speed at me. It galloped as if it were itself an aspect of the wind. Just when I thought I was about to meet my end, it went over me, knocking me on my back. I saw the underside of its head, its powerful shoulders and haunches. Like the shadow beings, I was surprised to find that it wasn't entirely solid. I saw stars and branches beyond its translucent body as I fell backward. I was stricken and dazed, having narrowly missed getting trampled to death. I rolled over to my stomach so that I could try to stand up and run. If that bull was turning around to come charging back, or if something else was going to come out of that void in the night, I wanted to be out of its way. So I pushed myself up from the ground to my hands and knees. Before me, a woman floated in a circle of light. Poised, still and silent, she gazed down at me. Her beauty tranquilized me, and my fear vanished. I thought no more of the bull. I rose to my knees and spent a minute trying to take in what I was seeing. I was kneeling within the circle of light emanating from her, everything else in the woods dimmed in comparison. I felt gently cradled by the soft light of her presence. At about the height of my chin, her feet were bare and pointed downward as she hovered. The gleaming robe she wore hung down to her ankles. The garment was simple and featureless, apart from the evenly spaced rolls that formed from the bunching of the fabric. They seemed to be some ancient priestess's robes with long sleeves drooping past her wrists and an unadorned collar. It reminded me of goddess robes from Roman sculptures and mosaics. She had blonde hair and the most dazzling blue eyes I'd ever seen. I realized she only seemed tall because of the angle I saw her from. She must have been about 4.5 or 5 feet tall at the most. My sense of calm deepened as I looked into her eyes. "You know why I'm here," is what she said to him. Her lips hadn't moved as she spoke in a high, clear voice, and I knew what she meant. And a wave of embarrassment, remorse, and sorrow overtook me because his family had been so severely traumatized by people disbelieving, by breaking into their house, by causing all kinds of havoc at them in town, at their house, at school. It was basically relentless. After 5 years, his own kids were in steady danger. He says one night he went out the back, looked up at the sky, and said, "I'm finished. I'm done with this. I never want to see any of this again. I'm not going to say a word to anybody anymore. I hate this. My family is in danger. You never let me take your pictures and photographs or videos. I'm out." That's what he said. So, shortly thereafter, within a night or two, if I remember correct, don't quote me on that, but she visits him. So that's what she meant. You know why I'm here. So I had vowed to abandon whatever path she had set me on just 5 hours beforehand. No matter how much pain my family and I had already been through, I could no longer allow them to suffer for a cause I couldn't even trust was leading anywhere. It devastated me to turn my back on all of it after so many dreams and experiences had compelled me to tell the world. But I reached my breaking point. I would not allow the house full of laughter behind me to return to ostracism, fear, and misery. Now looking at her, I regretted it with every cell in my body. However, within that mysteriously placid expression on her face, I knew my error was not final. She had appeared to offer me a way forward, to show me that these tribulations had not been in vain. There was a subtle dance of meaning that had been playing out over the years that led to this night. I had to trust that revelations like these could not be delivered all at once in blinding clarity. Otherwise, they would be rejected or ignored. You cannot quit now. You made an agreement that must be kept. I was in total awe of her. It was clear she was director of all that had happened. In a trance-like state, I could not move, and I didn't want to. She communicated to me that the orbs, the beings, the missing time were all tools that she'd been using. She talked of the beings as guardians she sent to do her bidding, of my apocalyptic vision as a possible future for Earth, of our agreement requiring absolute trust in her. She vowed that if I continued in this mission, she would protect my family and me, and she would allow the orbs to be photographed, and she would allow me to show these phenomena to witnesses outside of my family if I continued to talk about what I saw. She said that she would never leave my side. So I was overwhelmed with gratitude for this protection and assurance. For long portions of her disclosure, she raised her pointer finger up to her lips as though she were telling me to keep a secret or to be quiet, and I could not understand what she was saying. Afterwards, she said that I would be able to understand what she had said when the time came. I asked her what the lump of living fur was that I had been given. She said it was an icon of humanity. directionless, senseless, without head or tail, in dire need of protection and guidance. I've read in some comments, why didn't Richard Dolan ask him about that little furry thing that he had received because he was going to need it. It's a symbol for us. He explains that right here in his book. We don't know what happened to it, but he got the point. Now, can we, is the question, right? That's how these symbolic things work. So toward the end, she conveyed the importance of my visitations. She warned that there were forces to cast the phenomena like this in a negative light, and that if this view won out, humanity would be set on a path to ruin. Now, that doesn't sound like demons. That sounds like someone who's looking to try to help guide to help out humanity. To me, that's just my bias, but that's how I read that. She said that my work was to prevent this dangerous deception from taking root. She did not tell me why, but I had been chosen to tell humanity of the phenomena's benevolence. So the first step in this work was the simple acknowledgement of what I saw. A new knowledge must arrive. Mankind must awaken to it. That's what she told him. She didn't say anything about a time-space shift in reality, none of that horsey noise that I've been reading in comments on other videos. He just said there's something about new knowledge that must arrive. He hasn't said what kind it is. We just don't know. Making up shit and then criticizing Chris Bledsoe is not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. Let's go with what the man says for now. Well, after 20 or 30 minutes on my knees listening to her, I was disoriented and totally drained of energy. When she finished talking, her halo of light drew back into her and she vanished. Forgetting to check on the prickling creature in the kennel, I scrambled back to the house, wobbling and deliriously tired. I got in the back door and passed out on the hallway carpet, covered in dirt, and forgetting the boys had friends over, as I fell asleep, I remembered her words, "This is your burden, you must bear it." Now, the reason why this particular situation caught my very serious attention is because one of the biblical scholars that I had paid attention to through the years has been a lady who was a Methodist minister, and she was president of the Old Testament Study Society, something like that. I should read this, huh? The former president of the Society for Old Testament Study. She's written 18 books, Margaret Barker. One of her recent books is The Mother of the Lord. Now, the remarkable thing that Margaret Barker has been doing from the biblical end of things, and Chris, yes, he was a deacon in his local, more or less, countryside Baptist church, right? It's sincerely, highly unlikely. I am not meaning this disparagingly at any moment, but it's unlikely they're familiar with much scholarship of the Bible. What Margaret Barker has done is she has shown how there is a goddess figure in the Old Testament. And she spills over into the New Testament through the earthly types women in the New Testament. So we're talking about a principle, call it the divine feminine, however you want to express this. This principle was very important in the biblical text, and she has great evidence of this in her newest book, the patriarchal societies took her out of the texts. The Great Lady, Restoring Her Story by Margaret Barker, brand new out this year. I've read it. I've also made a video of it. For those of you who would care, if you want, I can put a link in the description to this one. What caught my eye is the bull that came charging out. Now, of course, It wasn't a real flesh and blood bull by his description, and yet the wind was blowing hard, and it was a very traumatic experience, and he was familiar with the idea, and he did fall back, and then it played no more part in the story. It is quite fascinating that the ancient mother goddess symbol of the cow is very prominent, and her son was known as the calf. Now, it's quite remarkable, and before you get off and tell me, yeah, you're just spouting paganism, no, I am not. Margaret Barker has shown through the biblical scholarship, and she's very diverse with the Hebrew and the Greek as well. The ancient epithet for many of the religions that surrounded Israel and for which Israel adapted was the king, the god of those various nations was called El. And the name the word Elohim in the Hebrew Bible is the gods. It can also mean goddess, according to Strong's concordance. But El was known as the bull. And of course, in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, they had the great bull of heaven. He was the bull. Now, the remarkable thing about this particular imagery is it coincides beautifully with the astrological alignment of the earth in the cosmos in that ancient day. When the records of the ancient antique civilizations, such as Mesopotamia, Sumer, the Sumerians, and the Egyptians, the precession of the equinoxes, the constellation that the Earth's axis was in, was Taurus the bull. And so, in that 2,200-year age, they had the god being symbolized by the bull, his wife by the cow, their son by the calf. Then, as the procession occurred through time, the next stage that happened just happened to be the ram, Aries, the ram. And interestingly enough, in the later age, as recorded in the Old Testament, the Jewish sacrifices, and we get right to the story of Abraham, right? Sacrificing Isaac. And the angel stopped him, and he looked off yonder, and there was a ram caught in the thicket. So this is basically a mythologization with the religious aspects as well as the cosmological symbolisms of the sky above them, because they were fortunate they didn't have TV or computers. All they did for their nighttime entertainment was learn about the night sky. So for the next 2,200 years, after we went out of Taurus and into Aries the ram was the main figure of their mythos. And then, about the time of the birth of Jesus, we went into the constellation of Pisces, the fish. Jesus was known as the fisher of men. The great ram Mendes from the Egyptian had been overwhelmed through the time, the 2,200 years, and now we're in Pisces, the fish. Jesus takes over. He is the fisher of men. We are literally now in our day at the end of Pisces. We are 200 years out before we are in the age of Aquarius. And the age of Aquarius is going to focus on a completely different knowledge and set of symbols, just exactly as every one of the previous ages had done. So we really are in a great transition phase, is what I'm telling you. And in the age of Aquarius, the divine feminine is going to be the most prominent. Now, that's fascinating. So I wanted to share that with you from Margaret Barker's scholarship. There's many YouTube videos on this that you can watch if you would care to. So anyway, that is one of the most remarkable aspects of Chris Bledsoe's book that I thought was quite interesting. I'm up to page 245. I'm going to skip and pick and choose here. Again, deep in my heart, I know that the lady had appeared that night to give Junior the impulse to ask for help. I was thankful she had shown up. So the lady keeps appearing periodically. In the meantime, in between the several months of silence from the lady, the orbs are showing up. He is able to bring a neighbor over and show him the orbs. Various high military officials, various government officials from NASA, the CIA, the FBI, MUFON, etc., were now able to come over, and he would show them the orbs because he knows when the orbs will come, and they agreed to let him show them to people, and he's been doing that ever since. Now, the Discovery Channel did a wickedly ridiculous, stupid story on him and completely made all of the wrong false informations out there, and that made everybody hate Chris Bledsoe and call him a liar, etc. So if you've watched the Discovery Channel and that's where you get your evidence, I personally will go with what Bledsoe himself says. Even Jim Semivan has admitted and said that the Discovery Channel was a hatchet job. They should have known better. The MUFON hasn't done a whole lot better with Chris at first, but they've kind of sort of picked it up in quality, etc. But now it's just basically on Chris himself. And he has friends over, and they spend an evening watching the orbs when they show up. So his son, why was it necessary to bring my son, who had already been through so much, so close to the brink of death? Why bring him there only to bring him back from the ledge? His son almost died from a kidney problem. To all of these questions, I can only guess and remember what I have been told. Have compassion toward all life. Speak about what I see and do not ever give up. So what happens is he feels the electricity in his body when the orbs are near. The lady apparently healed him of part of his issues with his body. It helped him maintain and keep going through life. He has hugged people. He has never claimed to heal by himself. It's always through a different higher power, the lady specifically, that he says the healing occurs. Demons don't heal. Demons possess and they torture. And so that's why I don't think these are demons, because every time that there's been a healing, now publicly in his book, and I have heard a couple of other items in various different interviews with Chris, he does mention the healings that are happening. But his son, Ryan, says Chris has not let on at all to how many healings he really does. The lady through him really does. It's important that I get my wording correct too. Some yo-yo is going to go off and misquote me and say, yeah, the backyard professor thinks he's healing him by himself too. Chris has never said that. And people who are saying that, you need to read his book and go with him, because that's not how it works. So I just wanted to get that in the clear. So, and I get it. There are people who are concerned about the idea of demons. I get that. Yeah. They want it to be bad because that's their Christian mythos. They want Armageddon, stupidly enough. And so they've got to make it just as bad as they can make it so that we can get Armageddon, so that we can destroy everyone. No. The lady is all about love and reverence and respect for life and helping those who desperately need the help, so far as I'm aware. based on what I've read in the book. So here's another key that I want to emphasize that is also extremely interesting to me. The celestial world is all around us, and it's interacting with us all the time, even though we don't recognize that. But the other interesting thing, and it's what I'll close out my video review of this book will be about, the universe wants us to actively interact with it. And there is a way. And Chris tells us that way. So it's interesting. People are screaming for proof. I'm one of them. Videos, photos, etc. But with AI coming along, and with our computer resources and all, we can make as fake a videos as you can record on your phone. We can make as fake a photos as you can on your phone. And so is that a guarantee that it's real? Used to be. Unfortunately, why in the love of Sam Walton have so many stupid photos been so fuzzy and so difficult? And then you have those who want to make a quick buck, and so they'll make fake photos and claim they're UFOs, etc. Yeah, it's a chaotic mess, right? I'll just leave that hanging at this point because I'm getting to another very interesting part where he becomes friends with Diane Pasulka, a professor of religion in North Carolina. She is very well known in the intelligence community and with other various college avenues. And she's a good friend of Chris Bledsoe. And she got with him, and she has been discussing the ancient religious aspects, not the Von Däniken-ish stuff. But she has gone to the Bible with him and helped him try to grasp that this isn't just a recent phenomenon, but that it has been happening through the millennia. So it's kind of interesting, but I want to read this page and a half of what Diane Pasulka, who has her PhD in religious studies, has said. And I find this fascinating. I would love to talk to Diane more about this. The more, and I'm on page 274, 275 in his book. The more I talked with Diane and learned about the history of world religions, the more certain I became that the phenomenon were a worldwide and angelic presence. Native American folklore described the appearance of white stone canoes flying overhead. There were multiple reports of glowing flying ships all through the 18th and 19th centuries. One report even described a ship dropping anchor down into a London chimney. These Western accounts are just the tip of the iceberg. Diana said that one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people when it comes to reckoning with the phenomenon was a mistranslation of the word cloud in both the Old and the New Testaments. Now, I perked up at this. I said, hey, wait, I study the Greek and Hebrew too. Let's see what she has to say about this. Alternate and sometimes flat-out wrong translations were substituted for the word cloud. In most of these cases, the intent of the translator was to make the text easier to comprehend and therefore believe in. All right, that makes sense. Instead of clouds, words like weather and rain, sky, angel, and voice were used. Of course, it would be easier for a reader to believe that an angel spoke to someone rather than a cloud, or that lightning lit up the sky rather than a brilliant glowing cloud. With all of these texts, Diana and I discussed the likelihood of these clouds being orbs, like the ones I was seeing. And I sat back and I said, wow, how fascinating is that? So I'm going to do a little bit more research with this. I'm going to try to get a hold of Diane and have a conversation with her and talk about this. That's fascinating, because if you know anything about the Bible, and especially, and this is unfortunate, but especially when you begin to get into the original languages, I'm not kidding, there are mistranslations all over the place. And one of the best scholars on that is Margaret Barker. And she's got the evidence in this book, The Great Lady, Restoring Her Story. Brand new out, I believe it was May this year that came out. So that's fantastically interesting to me. So some seemed like a stretch. See, he's trying to be realistic too. He's trying to understand, all right, yeah, I can see that, but some of that might be a stretch, but most of them struck a deep, resonant chord in me. I recognized orbs in what I read with total confidence. Their playfulness, their strangeness, the consistent inconsistencies, the colors, the intensity, the mental connection were right there in the scripture. So the history of religious wars was especially troubling to me. It broke my heart that all the people on earth shared this ability to connect with the phenomenon directly, but were told it was against the rules. To paint with a very broad brush, various politically affiliated religious sects and institutions have told us that they alone hold the keys to religious experience. And those of you in my audience who are Mormons or are former Mormons, you know what I'm saying here, right? Yeah. Nobody's more controlling than the Mormon church, in my opinion. But then that's my experience. So see, that's my bias that I have to work on, right? So meanwhile, casting all outsiders as damned in the eyes of their God. And I talked about this in my video this afternoon that I just uploaded just a few hours ago. I will encourage you to go back and revisit that one. It's not a very long one, but it has a very, very important point in just this regard. This profound spiritual division among people has caused endless misery, isolation, dehumanization, and violence. The orbs were always here and open to all of us, ready to give us the signs and messages we need, but organized religion has shut them down. And now those in the organized religion misidentify them and misinterpret them as demons, which I just simply don't believe at all. So there is that. And let me turn over here to page 279 now. Oh, yes, he's talking to a group of ladies. And there was one particular woman that hung way back in the back. She was really quiet. She was kind of hunkered over. She didn't look very happy. Some of the other ladies were enjoying the discussion of his experiences. She was not participating at all. And then he brought up the fact that someone had their kidney healed. And he says this: I talked about the family waiting on the back of the patio for the results to come back. When the mother smiled and teared up, I raised my hands to thank God. Because someone, a little boy had been healed from a kidney problem. And as he was telling this group this story that had happened in the past, as he held up his hands to thank God, an orb showed up between his hands. And as soon as I mentioned this orb, a number of women gasped and looked, pointing over my head, wide-eyed and shocked. 3 of them immediately asked, "Did you see that?" One after the other, out of nowhere, the sad young woman on the couch leapt up and hugged me, saying, "I just knew you were going to talk about kidney cancer." We took a moment to process what had happened. The woman explained that they had all seen bright flashing lights over my head as I told this part of the story. The young woman introduced herself as Sharon DeBonis, saying that just a year and a half ago, one of her kidneys had been removed due to cancer, and her other kidney was now beginning to shut down, and she did not have long to live. And so, it had cancer. I'm sorry. The chemo-resistant cancer had swelled to the size of a softball. And so it was in danger because the chemo had killed her other kidney. Anyway, she was devastated. If the chemo didn't start working for her, she was a goner. And so he said that was an incredibly emotional moment for all of us there. The whole drive home, I could think of nothing else but her vacant, defeated stare, sitting slouched on the couch. I prayed for her nonstop the whole 2 hours. Heal Sharon, be with Sharon, fill Sharon with hope and love. Give Sharon a sign if it be your will. That is not how demons operate, either in the Bible or in any exorcism, in anybody who's possessed. That's why I say this isn't demons. It's a benevolent situation, even though it's difficult. And yeah, there's a lot of information that Chris is not being told by these UAPs. There's a lot of problematic information that we also would like to get, but we can't. And that's just the nature of the situation, so far as I'm aware. So she called the next morning, went to the doctor, and all of her blood tests came back with a miraculous result. Her platelets were back to normal levels, and the scan of her kidney showed the cancer had shrunk to a tiny, negligible speck, just as my father's had. I can't speculate what effect my meeting her had. What matters to me is that I had managed to give a scared soul some hope. Notice he doesn't say he healed her. He's looking to help people. And in some instances, the UAPs that are visiting him help him do that. Or else they are here to help, and they use him as the basis for that help. That is not how demons function. These are not demons. Once you read Chris's account, instead of just making stupid demon shit up because you're scared of the unknown, it's never happened to you, so it's weird, it's strange, and it terrifies you, so you have to keep arm's length and invent your demon hypothesis. I get it, but you're wrong. That's just how this works, right? So maybe Junior came forward. His own son had a problem with his kidney also. And he came forward because he allowed himself the hope of feeling better instead of suffering in silence. 3 people in my life had kidney illnesses, and 3 were healed. All I can say is I opened my heart to the sky. Notice, Chris Bledsoe is not doing the healing. I mean, God, get it right. Read his book first, would be my advice to those who keep bringing up this stupid, worthless, made-up shit objection. Okay? All I can say is I opened my heart to the skies, to the truth of what I saw, and asked for healing from the core of my being. Whatever was out there listened. To this day, this lady, Sharon, 15 years later, is still cancer-free and alive. Very interesting. Same thing with the Jewish boy that ended up being able to go to his bar mitzvah. The same type of situation happened where he was healed because Chris hugged him. And he said, I felt the power, the electricity surge through me into this boy. So I acknowledge that I didn't know how healings worked or happened. And neither did NASA, but they were investigating this. And they also recognize that this is actually happening. Various agencies, you have to keep in mind, are continually trying to find information on how this is working. While we don't know the total mechanics of this, it's not being invented by Chris. So I knew that hope, prayer, and focus were all important parts of the equation. Now, that's Chris's conclusion. But every time that he puts himself in that position, every time he has that mental framework, it works. So I'm just saying, it's his experience, right? So I try to get in tune with it. It feels like an infinite flow of generosity, compassion, and understanding. It's an emotional posture. Absolutely. It's a mental stance. He says so. Absolutely. And it's a way of seeing all at once. As I asked in prayer over and over again, I started to feel an energy build up in me that felt almost electrical. Along with this buzzing came the thought that if I gave Brandon a hug, he would receive the energy he needed, which he did proceed to do so later on that night, and Brandon was healed. It was almost 1 a.m. when Larry and I were checking into the hotel, and I got a call. It was Brandon's mother, ecstatic, exclaiming how thrilled she was that her son had had 2 full helpings of food. Yeah, he was starving to death because he couldn't eat. He was very, very emaciated. After I left, he ate 2 helpings of food. She said she hadn't seen his energy and appetite reach those levels for months. And all I could say was that he was a special boy, that I believed he would be okay, and that I would keep him in my thoughts for as long as it took. That is the Bledsoe methodology, okay? So we get it straight from the horse's mouth, which is the most reliable way. I agree. I understand entirely. Yes, I am giving Chris the benefit of the doubt so that we can understand the fullest possible context. For this reason, in that no one has ever been more stringently tested than this man by a lot of different kinds of agencies, government and military and civilian. And it's still happening with those very people who are testing Chris. After they're done testing him, he'll take them outside on a pleasant, nice, clear evening. They'll wait around looking up at the sky. And he says, then I feel that electricity in me. It's kind of like a static electricity buildup. And then he announces, he says, oh, I think they're here. And then they look up, and within 10, 15 seconds, an orb shows up. And then another one, and then another one. This is testified to by a lot of people in this book, including Colonel Alexander and Jim Semivan, the guy who wrote the foreword. So anyway, it's just quite frankly remarkable. Very interesting, fascinating. Deborah stared at me and told me that I saved her boy. This is on page 294. It's true I had felt the lady's presence just moments before, but I don't claim to have had any effect on him. These things simply happened. And there are times when I feel her unmistakable energy flowing through me. Today, Brandon is a sophomore in college. That is how Chris Bledsoe is healing, not through the power of some dippy demon. Stop that stupid shit. That's ridiculous. When you see him consistently, steadfastly saying how it happens, who are you to start inventing stupid stories and saying, no, that's how it happens? You don't know. He does. See what I mean? This is the primary source. Now, look, in history, they taught us, go to the primary sources, not the secondary source. For this story, for his way of healing, for his being able to call the orbs, for his having the experiences with a visitation of the lady, you go to him. That's called the primary source. You don't go to secondary, made up bullshit stories in comments to videos of people who don't like Chris Bledsoe for whatever reason, right? That's my opinion. Remember, tonight, I'm here to defend Chris Bledsoe, and I'll do it with the evidence of his book, right? So, I like this story. It's remarkable. I don't know if I believe it all. I'm not saying I believe everything. I have never had a UAP experience. I mean, it'd be cooler than all get out, wouldn't it, though? To be able to see those orbs. Some of them, he says, they begin like the size of a softball or whatever. And then when they move forward, they get the size of a school bus. I mean, would that not blow you away to have that experience? Well, I haven't. I really haven't. I have had one such experience that my wife talked with me about, that perhaps I do have a missing time event in my life during an OBE. Who knows what happened? I don't. If I was abducted, I have no idea, but we're not here to listen to my experiences. We're here to see what Chris Bledsoe had. I'll do that in another video if you want. So, here's another description that is a little bit more expanded on how this all works with Chris, who honestly doesn't give me the impression of being a charlatan. He is as bewildered as we are in so many respects. So here's what else he says. Every time and this is on page 298, 299. Every time I have an experience, there is a deep personal attunement to my emotional state. The words of my prayer and those for whom I pray. A focus settles over me that I suppose a big enough group of people can't synchronize adequately enough to mimic. So the second principle is precisely this intentional focus. Okay? So the mind can't be worried or preoccupied with dishes left in the sink or how awful the next day at work will be. One has to offer oneself wholly to the present moment. That's key. The third is that one can't harbor anger, hatred, violence, or anything negative and damaging when trying to observe the phenomena. If it could be said that they have a personality, it is playful, thinks far beyond our intelligence, and abhors all things base and cruel. So he says, I have this sense because of the desperate place I was in when they first appeared, and how they show kindness and the delight of their appearance to those deepest in the depths of hopelessness and despair. So again, there's another way that rather than rely on someone else's fuzzy video or photos, that could very well nowadays just be doctored, and so you can't really believe that evidence. He is explaining a way that we too can have our own UAP experience. Now, I've got to confess, I haven't been trying this, but I'm going to. I have not had a UAP experience, but I'm hoping to, etc., etc., etc. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and try this method. Why not? It's worked for hundreds and hundreds of other people besides Bledsoe, and it's continuing to work right now. So let me skip up to page 311. Yeah, this is very interesting. This is where Jim Semivan stood up to the group who he had told the family to gather from the neighborhood, from the grocery stores in town, etc. It was just a small town, maybe a population of a couple of hundred people. But these were all the people who had been mocking them and teasing his kids relentlessly, etc. And so they were still carrying, years later, they were still carrying that embarrassment and shame, and they felt less than. I mean, none of this was for their own personal glory and aggrandizement. It did not help them. It was torture, right? So Jim Semivan, as the foremost head lead CIA intelligence officer who became Chris's friend after testing him and some of the tests that Chris described in this book are amazing. And there were a lot more that Chris didn't include in all the details. But you really ought to read the book. Jim Semivan is the real deal. This is not a joke. Here's what he told this group. He said, all right, my children's friends and enemies were there. Some I recognized because they'd been in the living room the day before, and some I hadn't seen since my kids were in kindergarten. 3 of the friends were new graduates of Fayette Police Academy, all arriving in their squad cars. Whatever Jim was planning or saying, it would fall under the scrutiny of an audience of about a dozen people, only half of whom I really knew. Out in the distance, I could see the burnt tree as it faded into the night. If you haven't read the book, I won't give that away. That's a fun issue. Jim stood up and cleared his throat. The group went silent. He introduced himself, detailing as much as he could about his career in the CIA while hinting at everything he couldn't disclose. He was a practiced and steady public speaker with a direct gaze, searching the firelit faces for information. Having worked as a spy, he knew how to read people. In a voice of absolute certainty, he detailed how significant this case had become. NASA, the CIA, the FBI, the NRO, the Vatican, and every division of the Defense Department of the United States government had their hands in this, he told the group. The White House and other world leaders had been briefed on the events that took place on the very land that they were then standing on, the whole group. He denounced the Discovery Channel episode as a ridiculous and exploitive piece of entertainment that did us a huge disservice. He knew the Discovery Channel show was bullshit, because he's the one that was doing all the personal tests on Chris Bledsoe. The Discovery Channel idea, the theme that Chris failed a lie detector test, bullshit. Shame on whoever promotes that bullshit lie. Jim Semivan made that test. So that's what I say. Go to the primary source, man. Quit rumor gossiping and rumor mongering. What value is that? Right? So anyway, that is what Jim Semivan did. And that actually helped these guys begin to heal. None of their friends, their frickin' church was worthless as spit because they were demons. They were so misguided and ill-informed. They didn't know how to handle it. So it took a CIA spy and serviceman to help this family finally get back on their feet and recognize we aren't the bad guys after all. And that was years down the road. So, you kind of wonder, well, do I really want this kind of an experience? And if I do have it, do you really think I'm going to come on here on YouTube and tell you guys? You better think about that. You think just because I have an experience, I would be obligated to share what I learned with you guys? Really? How many of you are going to mock and spit on me because I mock and spit back? Are you ready for it? See what I mean? You see the problems this thing causes because we just don't know what it is. And that's what causes us to have fear, right? So this is not just roses, ice cream, and cupcakes. This is an extraordinary, life-changing event in every regard. So anyway, so I had the impression that now that this time the rumors that rapidly progress through town and word of mouth as rumor goes, after Semivan's discussion, he said this time it seemed to work a little bit more in our favor, even though there were still some who were skeptical and doubting, who didn't bother to show up at the meeting because they don't really want to know. They're happier in demonizing people, right? I mean, don't we all do that? We shouldn't. So they began to realize the harm these jokes and rumors had caused us. I had the impression they thought of me not so much as demonically possessed, crazy, or addicted, all of which I've seen accusations against Chris Bledsoe just today in comments on some of his interviews. And these are people who aren't reading this book. You really don't want me to say what I'm really thinking. That's disgusting. And I promise I'm being charitable. So, but simply a man who saw things he couldn't explain. Simply a man who saw things he couldn't explain. That is why if I have my UAP experience, I will be damned if I'm going to make a video about it and tell it to the world. You don't deserve to hear it. I don't deserve to have it. We all are still too ignorant and willing to mock and spit on people for claiming they have an experience that we don't. And therefore, if we haven't, see, we like to imagine that reality centers around our life experiences, and anybody who has experiences that is weirder than mine, they're just lying or whatever. I mean, that's so arrogant, it's embarrassing when you stop and think about it. I guarantee you, my life's experiences, even the weird ones, are not yours, but that doesn't mean I'm lying and full of it or on drugs or drunk all the time. But that's what the accusations come out and say. You know, we humans, we're a terrible species. Did you know that? It sucks. Now, there's something we can do about it if we want to. But do we want to? It's so astonishing that we would rather vilify than verify. That blows my mind. No wonder we're so easy to manipulate by politicians and church people, and we keep getting taken to the cleaners, and we can't make any money or save any money because we aren't critically thinking, right? Well, the first key to critical thinking, I'll give you the hint. Yes, you're welcome. I've done you a favor tonight. I promise if you'll follow this procedure, you're more safe than not in acquiring actual knowledge. Go to the primary sources first and get what they say. And then from there, branch out, because that's your anchor. I didn't say believe everything the primary sources say. Don't you dare let me see someone saying, oh yeah, the backyard professor says you have to believe everything Chris Bledsoe said. I did not say that. I know how gossip's working in the UAP community. I get it. There's a whole bunch of bullshit and liars out there who are skeptics, and they just say anything they want. I did not say I believe everything. I said go to the primary source first as the basis of a more accurate knowledge of an event or a situation or a scientific piece of knowledge, astronomical knowledge that you're studying. The primary sources are the best ones. That's what I'm saying. I have to be really clear on this because I've seen the silliness in the comments on other video interviews with world famous scientists, and they're skeptics saying, oh, this guy just lying through his teeth. you know, you have some 22-year-old who's never held a full-time job and just barely got into college, and all of a sudden he's telling me what a 30-year veteran scientist, what he's saying is completely false because this little kid that barely started college hasn't ever heard of that. You gotta be freaking kidding me, man. Are you kidding me? I will take the scientist 100% of the time over some kid that can't comprehend what's being said. Your ignorance, my ignorance, is not a barometer for everybody else's truth and knowledge. That's very important to recognize, right? I'm getting exercised over this because there has been so much social injustice done to so many people out there, and it's still going on. And it's not necessary. We're not required to believe. Test it, right? Go talk to him. You know, do the method he says and find out for yourselves is even better. And if you choose to describe your situation, that's your call. But I'm just telling you, if you're going to slap me for saying, oh, yeah, well, what a schmuck you are, shirts, because if you have your experience, you're not going to give that knowledge to us, you damn right I'm not. I've seen the comments and the commentaries. Believe you me, you want the experience. I also, like Chris Bledsoe, will tell you how I did it, but I damn sure ain't going to tell you anything. And get kicked in the teeth by ignoramuses who don't know better? No, thanks. I'll keep my knowledge to myself, and you're the ones that get to stay in darkness. That's what's happening in our society. We're not an open, loving, friendly society, and so there isn't disclosure. There's suspicion. But I've seen how people like some of the whistleblowers, Lou Elizondo, and Colonel Alexander and Chris Mellon and people like that, Greer, and who's the other one? The gentleman that was the newspaper guy in Las Vegas. I've seen how people mock them and terrorize their lives. And I'm not interested in that. If that's going to be the response, you get to wallow in darkness. That's how this works. That's how it works. You better get used to it because ain't nobody going to talk to you. Nobody. Not especially if you have the way to do it yourself, right? So that's what I'm going to get to close up. And I'm not trying to be preachy, and I'm not trying to make false accusations. Just go see the interviews of these people and then read the comments. It will appall you. And nobody's reading their books. It's crazy. And I'm not saying they're 100% telling the truth either. I'm not saying I agree 100% with any of them either. That's not my point. It's crazy. So here we go. To wrap this up, now that I've castigated some of the attitudes out there in our UFO community that just should not be happening, but unfortunately are, and I don't believe in social injustice, so I fight back and I defend those who are being unjustly criticized. And that is why I'm defending this man, because he has been unjustly for decades. And now he's giving us a magnificent gift and he's still being mocked. And he's been the most tested one. And none of the people who are testing him are ridiculing him, but all the other ignorant people are. It's ridiculous. So here's the method. And I've given you hints already. He's already talked about this a little bit. So, page 345. The last 16 years has been a tremendous test of my faith. But this story does not end here. It continues with you, the reader. Do you want to experience the phenomenon? Because Chris Bledsoe is not a special holier than all the rest of us, chosen prophet and servant of the Lord God. That's not what he is. He is just like us. He's just a typical Joe. And something happened to him that changed his life, right? But he's not the only one that it can happen to. Now, through the decades, he has discovered that this thing is entirely beneficial, loving, peaceful, right? And here's what he says. And it's something that I fully believe that 90% of us aren't going to do. And that's all good. It's okay. I'm not convinced I can do this. I mean, I haven't done this. I'll put it this way. I haven't done this yet, right? I don't have any UAP experience. But here's what Bledsoe says can happen. If you do it correctly, but I haven't yet. I'm not so sure either, right? See, there's some skepticism here. I've got other issues with this book and some of the claims in it that I will do in other videos. I do not like all of this book 100%. There are some issues that bother me, especially on the healing stuff. So, and I'll get to that. I'm not calling Chris a liar, though. I have issues with it. I'm very grateful that he's had that wonderful gift and shared it validly with people who were blessed. I'm very thankful for that. But there's other parts of this. So, all you need to do is humble yourself before the heavens. Now, what this means is simply go outside and look up. Connect your heart and mind as one. Humble yourself and say out loud, I am here. It's not more complicated than that. God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, did not make it difficult to connect. You don't have to follow some set of formal instructions. You don't have to learn a bunch of fancy words and acronyms to experience the phenomena. It's between you and God. Just pick one spot in the night sky, surrender yourself and say, I am here. And don't give up. Stay positive, because if it doesn't happen in the first 5 minutes, you absolutely have no right to walk away and say, Chris Bledsoe's lying. No, that's not how this works. It sometimes takes 4 hours for them to show up. Well, that's a waste of my time. Then that's your problem, not Chris Bledsoe's. If you can't be patient enough for one of the most astonishing experiences of your life, then it sucks to be you. Don't ask me to empathize with you in that regard, because if you're not willing to do what it takes to win an Olympic gold medal in your favorite sport, don't bitch that you got robbed from the gold medal. You didn't do what it took. Right? If you don't get your PhD because you only read 1 hour a day and missed on reading 150 of those books that you were supposed to study through the 8-year course and don't get the PhD, don't yell that it's the education system that cheated you. No, that's not how this works. If you don't put it in, you don't get it out. That's the law of the universe, right? You know, there's so many people who try to cheat like that, and then they blame everything else. No. On this one, it's on you. Because here's the method that works. Not only for Chris, but many people who he's been showing this stuff to, they're doing it too. So the system works. So, you know, I'm just saying. Now, I have not done this yet. I'm really going to try, though. Might be kind of fun. Might be interesting. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about what happens when it happens to me, but I'm not going to expose the whole thing in one first video, right? So anyway, don't give up, stay positive. This is just the beginning. So, and then his prophecy, the so-called prophecy of Regulus in the, what did he say, Easter 2026, Now that's 1.5 years, man. Really, seriously, that's within our lifetimes, barring any unforeseen circumstances, right? So in 1.5 years, the lady says, when Regulus, which is in Leo the lion, the backward question mark, the bottom star, Regulus, when it's pointing directly over the Sphinx gaze, there's a new knowledge that's going to happen to humanity. Now, that's how Bledsoe said the lady told him. He did not prophesy the rapture. Good God, will you quit inventing stupidity and then blaming Chris? That's just wrong. He did not say the quantum substrate of the subatomic particles are going to grow into the size of basketballs and they're going to destroy the world. I mean, quit making stuff up. The claim is there's going to be a new knowledge. He hasn't explicitly said what it was. Does he have to? I don't think so. In the meantime, we have 1.5 years to practice doing some meditation techniques. We have 1.5 years to try to prepare, perhaps, if you're interested. If you don't believe any of this horse manure, then don't do nothing. It's all good. But for those who do it, it's kind of like the Kundalini yoga. You have millions of people in the East who demonstrate that through their meditative qualities, they can open up the third eye and the Kundalini travels up to the different chakras, and they are some of the most spiritual giants on the planet, and they understand the whole point of the universe, and we still mock them because they aren't doing our science. Their system is hokey. It's bullshit. You can't do it with your heart, etc. And yet there's millions of people who testify that they do. But we're not willing to try that because in our vaunted arrogance, we already know the answers. That's not scientific either. Science doesn't say we know it all. Science says we barely know anything. You think I'm kidding, don't you? I'm going to pull a BYU blooper on you one more time because I've got a very critical, important book to share with you that is by none other than George Cham and Daniel Whiteson. George Cham is the creator of the popular online comic Piled Higher and Deeper, also known as PhD Comics. He earned his PhD in robotics at Stanford, and Daniel Whiteson is the professor of experimental particle physics at the University of California, Irvine, and a fellow of the American Physics Society. He conducts research using the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. So don't tell me these two are just woo-woo ninnies. We Have No Idea is the name of his book, A Guide to the Unknown Universe. And it is 350 pages full of every aspect of our universe that we have ever read in popular science books, in the magazines, in our college courses. We have those great big thick college books of physics and astronomy and astrobiology and chemistry, etc. These gentlemen show, and this book is a 2017 book, the year that Lou Elizondo became a whistleblower. Brand new stuff. Basically, they show through serious analysis that we don't even know 4% of the universe yet. And the vast majority of laws of, say, physics or the laws of chemistry here on Earth that we love to pretend like we are God on this world, we don't know 90% of it. So again, and I know I'm going to start losing subscribers. I probably have tonight. I have no doubt. A little bit of humility is what is called for. And we are such an arrogant species. Sorry. I don't know how else to put it, man. So that's pretty much what I'm going to share. I get it. Some of you have probably vehemently disagreed and mocked and probably unsubscribed to me from the chat. I get it. It's all good. I'm still all friends with everybody. I'm just telling you, sometimes you have to call people on it. And I get it. I'm going to be called on it too. I fully expect that. Yeah. That's called discussion. That's what we're after, right? Yeah. None of us here on YouTube are going to get the final answers, for Pete's sake. We're just talking about what everybody else is talking about and trying to analyze the data, etc. Maybe something new comes up and we all get giddy and excited and share it. But we don't know a lot. And we don't know a lot about the UAPs. So humility is called for, but also something that, might be helpful is developing a desire to know again. Because I get it. There's a lot of us that are jaded in this whole thing. Yeah. Ready to just forget about it. Maybe sometimes it's good to take a break, Maybe for a year or two, you probably could forget about it and do really, really well and then come back to it fresh. I don't know. So I don't have all the answers. I have all the questions, and I'm making the videos to explore, have a little fun, sometimes cuss people out, sometimes praise people, sometimes try to emulate people, because I'm only human too. I've got my biases, and I am definitely wrong a lot of the time. I'm not perfect. I don't know half as much as I wish I did. But it's fun to discuss. And I have a very intelligent audience, and I'm very grateful for that, because it's fun to get your ideas too. Even though sometimes it seems like I'm cussing you out, I'm cussing me out also. I don't mean to cuss people out. Technically, it's not anyone in my audience, I don't think. But some of the chicanery, some of the outright bold lies and fake news against Chris Bledsoe, that's got to stop. Quit repeat. Just because you read it in a chat room doesn't mean it's true. Come on. Can we begin to turn on some critical thinking is my question. And I know there are people who are telling me the same thing, and I'm working on it. Yeah. So I'm in this boat with you. I'm not saying, hey, I'm immune from this. I am okay. You guys need to change. I'm going to be the first among us to try to change and improve myself and recognize my weaknesses and admit when I'm wrong, but I'm going to try to share when I believe I'm right also. Yeah. Because I'm as incomplete as anybody is. That's how it works. So, all right. Hey, I'm at an hour and a half. I do appreciate all of you. I appreciate you for sticking with me. And thanks for letting me review this book. Thanks for enjoying it. I hope. I didn't get a chance to read any of the chat at all. I will later. And perhaps I'll make a video on what y'all said in the chat. I don't know. I hope it wasn't too vicious. Sometimes you get bots. Sometimes you get people here who really drive the chat crazy. I hope that didn't happen, because I don't have any moderators. I trust that my audience is mature enough to have a little bit of self-control. And so far you have. And I'm very deeply appreciative of all of your friendships. Hit the like and subscribe. Share the videos as you can. Let other folks know we've got a new kid on the block, so to speak, and I'm trying to kick out as much info as I can. I'm trying to be as realistic as I can. I'm trying to be hopeful as I can. I'm excited for the future because there are new things on the horizon that is way beyond our current comprehension, and it's going to drive us crazy because it is so flippin' loopy lunatic. But once we understand how it works, it's going to become really obvious. That's Arthur C. Clarke. Any super advanced technological civilization is seen as magic until we catch up. That's where we're at with these UAPs, is my suspicion. So exciting times ahead. It's a great time to be alive. So, all right, I love y'all. I got to go. Appreciate everybody. Have a great night. Remember, stay well. Make friends, be happy, smile, fool people. And by smiling, make them think you're up to something no good. And remember, you two are awesome. And I'm totally sincere when I say that. Catch up to you soon.